So let's start with the quarterbacks, Clark. I know we originally touched base a couple weeks ago, and you said even the list you put out then needed to be updated. So I'm working with an outdated list here. I'm curious to hear who you have right now as the top returning quarterback in the SEC.
Top returning quarterback in the SEC. It's a name that's probably going to bring a smile to your face. It's KJ Jefferson. He is a absolute hoss in the run game. There's no doubt about it. Whether it is going empty and they're doing kind of split zone action, or if they're doing quarterback counters, kind of gap scheme north and south things to get the ball in his hands. But one thing that I can ignore, and there is kind of not a whole lot of separation between 1, 2, 3, 4 in the conference, but I do give him the edge because of his designed rushing ability. And he also returns with the SEC's best catchable pass rate. So, not every pass is gauged the same in my charting system. An accurate pass is where you're hitting a guy in stride with minimal adjustments, where he doesn't have to do anything to negate the optimization of the route, having to stop, dive, or anything like that, where you can get a lot more yards after the catch. He was one of the better ones at giving his guys an opportunity to actually catch it. Pinpoint accuracy, like I just mentioned, though, he was below average. So there is some areas of opportunity for him to improve his game. Of course, in 2021, under Kendall Briles' tutelage, he led the SEC in deep pass rate. That's very sexy. But the problem is he's losing Kendall Briles this offseason. So how is he going to manage Dan Enos' guidance over Kendall Briles, who runs a very quarterback-friendly scheme, like Tennessee, that super spread, Baylor spread type of offense that's all about pace, space, and putting asses in grass. So he's absolutely number one. I would say number two is Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels, he is his best self, no doubt about it, when he is scrambling to space. To space. He still takes an awful lot of sacks. According to my charting metrics, 3 quarterbacks were in the major danger zone in sack to pressure ratio. Will Levis, which has drawn a lot of criticism this draft season for his propensity to take sacks. Hendon Hooker, who is a very much risk adverse in terms of throwing downfield, but he himself was a fairly good scrambler. And then Jayden Daniels. So while Jayden Daniels is really good on zone read keeps and running to space when there's no one there, when everyone is just turning their backs to him, as a design runner, as a sack eraser, not quite there. Even though his West Coast operation really is, safe. We saw during parts of last year where Brian Kelly was almost begging him to throw more downfield, to almost like dare him to throw interceptions. And when we saw Garrett Nussmeier get in there, where he had that kind of a risky style of play, that YOLO style of play, it really did elevate that offense. You can really see how there is area of opportunity for him as well. Even though, he is very accurate. I think he has the top returning accuracy figure in terms of on target passes. His operation was just short. And if he's just not as a dangerous downfield thrower with someone like Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 2 in the SEC, or wide receiver 1, depending on who you ask. I have Anaya Smith slightly ahead just because of his all-encompassing game, his return game, his stuff in the backfield that Jimbo Fisher kind of likes to do. But very, very good situation for Jayden Daniels there. And, bringing back a pretty proven line, I think, should maybe help him be a little bit more comfortable this year. Get the ball out quick, because like Hendon Hooker, sometimes he held the ball a beat too long when someone was potentially open downfield and he just didn't see him. Scouts aren't going to like that. And, of course, Brian Kelly's certainly not going to like that. So that's one area of opportunity for him, in addition to improving his downfield aggressiveness. And then we have a newcomer, Devin Leary. Now, Clark, Devin Leary's come off an awful season, or not an awful season, but a fairly mediocre, forgettable season before his injury. Well, 2 years ago, he had one of the top touchdown interception ratios in the nation when I charted him against his 5 hardest opponents. His accuracy tracked to be one of the top 3 in the SEC. He can attack all levels of the field. His issue, though, he's kind of a slight build. He's not like Will Levis. He's not 6'4". He's more 6'1", 6'2". So if you're throwing towards the middle of the field, his vision could be a little bit more impaired than Will Levis, which could mean, like we mentioned with these other quarterbacks, holding on to the ball a beat too long, or what he did during his scouting tapes against his 10 hardest opponents last 2 years, sail passes. And you don't want to leave your guy high and dry over the middle, because even we saw with Levis, if you're a little bit behind with UK's young developing wide receiver core, caroms and things slightly off the mark can lead to interceptions, which for Kentucky's modus operandi that is just absolutely devastating. They don't run a lot of plays. They don't lean into the explosive play battle. They're all about time of possession. And when you're giving opponents extra possessions, that is absolutely detrimental. But because of how he can move, how he is going to be paired with Liam Combs, how Dane Key and Barian Brown are going to move in that year two, and how he is going to basically fall into a scheme that ran a decent amount of the staples he ran at NC State. So we're talking about like tray sets, 3x1, verts, shock, inverted stick, all curls, shallow, stuff like that. Kind of things that were sprinkled in when UK was under Liam Combs in 2021, and they were kind of faded this last season under Rich Scangarillo. But because of the environment and just the overall experience of him attacking at all levels of the field accurately, I really like him to be a top 3 passer entering this upcoming season.
Now, let me ask you something, Clark. Like I said, I'm working with a little bit a list that you've updated your own, so I may be incorrect here. But
No problem.
you mentioned Garrett Nussmeier there, and on the list I have, you don't have him as top 10, and maybe that's just due to lack of volume of actually grading him. But you got some guys on the list I'm looking at that fit that mold, that don't have a ton of snaps. Where would you put Garrett Nussmeier in here? And I'm certainly not suggesting that LSU should go with Garrett Nussmeier, but there's reason to believe he may be, like you said, raises the ceiling of that offense. So it wouldn't be a stunner either if he's a starting quarterback. How do you see him in your model there?
He is a hold right now. I am ready to boost him up to give him like a 92, 93 grade if he is a starter or if he enters the transfer portal, which I am not ruling out. I'm sure Auburn is absolutely drooling at the potential that they can have if they get him or someone like Jackson Dart in their offense. So I think we're going to see a couple more transfers after this spring period. I'm not going to rule him out, but that's why I left him out, just because Jaden Daniels is just so entrenched at the starter position at this time. But look, I can't deny his playmaking. And to speak to his YOLO style of play, no other SEC quarterback last year was both top 5 in interceptable pass rate and explosive pass rate than Garrett Nussmeier, while leading the SEC with I think only Hendon Hooker had a higher average depth of target. So he wasn't just rinky dinking, and he was really trying to stretch the field. So it's really an attractive style of play when you're coming from someone like me who's looking across the entire conference and everyone's trying to do these RPOs, horizontal spacing concepts, and you get a guy like him who could just come in and just really get your eyeballs popping. Kind of like the guy down there in Knoxville who might be starting there, Mike. What do you think about old Joe Milton?
Bazooka Joe, we call him down here in this state. I mean,
I love that nickname. I love that
He's
nickname.
going to win 2 Heismans this year. He's got that strong an arm, but no, I'm not sold on him. I got to be honest with you, but I think given what we saw against Clemson, the progression that he made from 2021 when he came out the gate, he looked significantly better. But again, that was a bowl game. Those are oddities. Clemson was down some guys, but particularly his efficiency in the red zone stood out to me, to where it gives me confidence that Joe Milton, the offense is not going to take a huge step back, in my opinion, even if he's not Hendon Hooker caliber, and expecting him to be that, I think would be unrealistic for most Vol fans.
Oh, of course. I mean, Hendon Hooker had one of the best clips in my records at throwing like interceptable passes. Not throwing it into harm's way. Obviously, when you're throwing more errant and off-target passes, that tends to go up, and that tends to kind of be Joe Milton's game right now. But with the weapons they have, I mean, look, Squirrel White, if I can say his name correctly, led college football last year in yards per route run. That is the premier receiver efficiency metric. It was over 4 yards. That's insane. If he's going to be the Jalen Hyatt role from the slot, I mean, the sky's the limit for him. And then when you're thinking of someone like Deontay Thornton, who's coming from Oregon through the transfer portal, 6'5", he has the build to potentially be a Cedric Tillman 2.0 if he can put some mass on his frame. And you're bringing back Brew McCoy, who's a bulldog himself at the X wide receiver position on the far right of the formation. So he has a lot of weapons. While the offensive line is going to lose some pieces, while the running backs themselves don't necessarily do it for me, it's very much a committee type of system. I think Josh Heupel has earned the benefit of the doubt looking at like kind of the mid passers he had at UCF. I'm not the biggest Dylan Gabriel fan. I think he underthrows passes a whole lot. but just how he can recognize when a defense is vulnerable on the back end and when he's able to take a shot. There's no one skill set you would like better than someone who can throw it 50 yards downfield and give this guy an opportunity to come down with it. Sure, yes, like I said, raw accuracy still very much needs to be improved. His lower body mechanics need to be a little bit more in sync. But with what he is right now, there's no reason to believe that Tennessee cannot continue to be one of the top offenses in the SEC.
Now, you're very high, obviously, on Devin Leary, Kentucky's presumed starting quarterback. And people that I respect, they said he was the best quarterback in the transfer portal. So I'm not calling yet out here, but number 3 in the SEC, that's going to be rich for a lot of people. I know we're not particularly deep in the SEC, but and you said it yourself, we can't just compare him to Will Levis because they're different players. But when Will Levis came to Kentucky, he had more rushing attempts at Penn State than he had passing attempts. Say what you want about Will Levis, he's probably looks like he's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. He stabilized Kentucky at that position. They won 10 games his first season. Having said all that, with Liam Cohen back, with the weapons he'll have to work with, would it be stunning at all if Devin Leary, by the end of the season, is the SEC's best quarterback?
I don't think it's stunning because, again, like I really do value accuracy, and he has a track record of throwing an accurate ball. And Liam Cohen's going to try, in theory, give him opportunities to attack space. Kentucky, under Rich Scangarello, so you want to think more Kyle Shanahan. So that's more flood-based patterns as opposed to kind of like, and stick patterns as opposed to kind of vertical stuff that are like deep crosses with overtop posts, which was a very noticeable staple under the Rams for many, many years and still kind of is with Sean McVay there. So I think with how the tutelage is and his skill set, he's going to be maximized very, very well. Because again, if he's not running for his life, and that is the big caveat with Kentucky, how's that offensive line going to hold up? They are bringing in a transfer from the MAC. And last time I checked, the SEC defensive lines are a little bit more stout than things found in the middle of the country. So I don't know how that's going to go. So he obviously was not the same guy when things broke down last year and he had to operate under pressure and be a sack erasure. That's just not his game. He has to be a pre-snap processor, get the ball out quick, and attack space. Now, I think he can do that. I absolutely have no doubt in my mind. There's a reason I have him number 3. But I am not without my reservations that it could definitely hit a snag just because of the line up front. His size is not necessarily the best at dealing with that, and he has a track record for his accuracy to fall off a cliff in those situations.
Now, 2 guys you haven't referenced yet, Will Rogers, who I think you affectionately refer to as check down Charlie. He's in a more of an explosive passing attack system now under Kevin Barbay, so I'm interested to see where you got him. And I can hear the angry typing now from Columbia, South Carolina, with Spencer Rattler not yet named. Where do you have those 2?
I still really like Spencer Rattler's game. This time last year, I had him as the top non-5-star quarterback. So, like, if you had a great week 1, you're a 5-star. I think you're going to be a first-round talent. But as we saw, some of the trepidations that he came into the league with kind of maintained. Like, he himself became a check-down Charlie his second starting year at Oklahoma and started the year as such. Are you ready for this stat, Mike? So, up until the Tennessee game, only 10% of his passes traveled beyond 20 yards downfield. 1 out of 10 passes. Do you know what it was the final 3 games of the season? 23%. It more than doubled. And while I mentioned the turnover battle earlier, no single battle has more correlated to wins and losses in SEC football the last half decade than winning the explosive play battle. And of course, explosive passes on average tend to gain more than explosive runs. And so when you're just leaning into that style of play and you're giving yourself more opportunities, guess what? You can beat one of the best teams in the country. Guess what? You can upset Clemson. Guess what? You can keep Notre Dame on the ropes for most of the game until you figured out you couldn't run the ball. But that is one thing I have my eye on. It's a new play caller. So how much was that just being, okay, it's the end of the year, YOLO ball, I gotta put my arm on tape as what was Eli Manning's doppelganger that he did at Penn State? Was it like Chad Power? Whatever. He said, gotta get the arm on tape. Gotta get the arm on tape. I don't know if he was going Chad Power mode or not, but he was that's what his style of play was what I wanted to see the entire season. Yes, he's going to throw interceptable passes. That is just who he is. But he's got arm talent that he can make throws that no one can. Even in week 1, he's rolling right. He throws the ball like 40 yards downfield on the money. You can't teach that. So yes, I just need to see a little bit more consistency, because like when you look at the things that South Carolina did with the check down Charlie approach to pad his down to down accuracy and trying to avoid interceptable passes, well, his raw accuracy was 66%. It was one of the better ones in the conference. But when you strip away screens, RPOs, and when you're looking at things like 10 yards downfield, or I'm sorry, when you're just looking at drop back passes without screens and RPOs in there, he's much closer to average, even though his 10 plus yard accuracy, the thing that I really like, was top 3 throughout the entire season last year. Not even towards the end of the year. It was consistent. So leaning into that, giving him more downfield, game-changing type of throws, I think would really behoove Darryl Loggins to pursue. Because, he's coming from that super spread offense in Arkansas, and there is a little bit of question. What exactly are they going to do? Are they going to do some of those slide RPOs underneath? They're going to keep it more bubble oriented with Wells on the perimeter, trying to get him the ball in space. How are they going to use their new 5-star Harbor? Are they going to get involved in that in that type of orientation and that type of approach? But for me, it's just, how can they get the better version of him, get the best version out of him by giving him downfield opportunities? Because I do think they have the receiving core to get open downfield and do damage, not only against Tennessee's sorry ass secondary, but against other people as well.
So where do you have Mississippi State's favorite son, Will Rogers?
Will Rogers, he is right under Mr. Rattler. So, and that's just because I wait and see. How is he going to react without Mike Leach being his captain? I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm getting pulled 1,000 different ways with the updates with the transfer rankings and the impact rankings. But when I was doing my scheme review for the last flight of the air raid, there were some things that were kind of regressing and kind of concerned me. And some of that was downfield, like 20 plus yard completions, accuracy, usage. He was much more, take what the defense gave him. Mike Leach was less inclined to run patterns that I think unlocked downfield potential, because a lot of what the air raid patterns are about are 7 yards and in. And if the defense is peaking, then you can throw over top. There's not a whole lot of double moves or kind of gadgetry innate in that scheme, but there are elements like those fake screens, those wheel stuff that you're bluff blocking, then you're running up the seam. Those things fell off a cliff. Skipper sail, thumb. So these are like bend back crosses. We saw this in the Super Bowl. So think Kelsey to Mahomes. Of course, there's a lot of examples in that play where he was running across the field like on a cross route. He stopped and then he was breaking back towards the sideline. That's thumb. And that's great, because if you're thinking of how the defense is going to react to that on the back end, you either have to stay back or allow a completion. If you want to cap it or take it away, you have to overcut it. So if you're coming down to overcut it and he's going to break the other way, there's going to be a natural void there. So again, when you run Y cross on 1 out of 10 plays, when you're setting up that weak flood action, it would behoove you to run that stuff a little bit more, especially because by rate, you were the least explosive passing offense in the SEC. The air raid became a ball control offense. So I can't say a ball control game manager is, special. Right. But if you say, there is a lot of reputation with the new play caller's ability to get explosive plays, it's just, okay, how can you get it out of them? Are you going to get it through yak stuff? Are you going to, like Spencer Rattler, goad him to take more downfield shots and be a little bit more aggressive version of himself? It's more wait and see type of him.
Now, I don't think you're going to get much debate when you're talking the top 4 quarterbacks. You could throw in Larry, the top 5. So now is when you really get kind of some I don't want to say guesswork, but a lot of fans, it's going to be guesswork. Who do you have as the next tier quarterbacks in the SEC?
Next would be Carson Beck, and it's just because of the area of opportunity around him. Look, you're bringing in 2 top-tier transfers in Ra Thomas, who was the de facto deep threat, I would say, for Mississippi State's rinky-dinky offense at the X receiver position. And then you're bringing in the guy who had the second most deep receiving yards, only behind Jalen Hyatt this year, and Dominic Lovett, despite the fact, who was throwing to him? Brady Cook. He was bottom 5 in deep accuracy and 10-plus yard downfield accuracy. So he had that going against him, and despite that, he still hauled in a lot of deep yards. So if you're bringing in a fantastic unit up front, Xavier Truss, Sam Pran, and
is it Mims?
Yes, Amarius Mims.
Yeah.
And you're bringing in Amarius Mims, a fantastic bookend himself, who's, you got to replace Broderick Jones and McClendon. But gosh, if there's anyone to do it, Amarius Mims, he's absolutely high in my book. So, I have him as like a day 2 grade, a high day 2 grade right now. And, he's really has very little starting experience, but him playing as a reserve really teases high upside. And of course, you're bringing back the SEC's best overall player to have at your side in Brock Bowers. So, like I said, I'm in the middle of drawing up schemes, and I'm doing Georgia's run stuff right now. Dude pops on tape even there. He's knocking Harold Perkins, who's a defensive dynamo, out of position. He's acting as a lead blocker on counter. He's catching deflected wheel patterns. What can Brock Bowers do? And I know, Darnell Washington is going to be sorely missed, but when you're elevating Oscar Delp, I'm like, boo-hoo. I don't feel any recompense for Mr. Carson Beck. I think he should absolutely slide in, and even though Todd Monken's not going to be there, and even though I do think Mike Bobo's best days are behind him, I do think there's going to be a whole lot of carryover from the previous operation, and not a whole lot of waves. I think it's going to be kind of business as usual. We're going to have a balanced approach, balanced run in terms of zone and gap schemes, and in terms of run pass type of stuff, with a high elements of screens, RPOs, and drop back play action, because I like to mention that as kind of a caveat when you're trying to evaluate the super spread quarterback. So think of kind of the scrutiny that Matt Corral got last year with all those tap passes and operating in RPO heavy type of scheme under Lane Kiffin. Well, outside of the super spread guys, no other SECer had a higher percentage of screens, RPOs, drop back play actions than Mr. Stetson Bennett. So you tell me if he was game manager or not, Mike. So that seems like he was game manager to me. Sure, he got a lot of results. He's going to be a freaking legend. His car dealership's going to make buku bucks one day. But it's just the way everything is built down there, they could slide in a very mediocre type of talent and still get a lot of results. So I still think Carson Beck is going to be a draftable person at the end of the day. It's just short term. I think he's still going to be that next guy right after Rodgers as a head of whatever Alabama quarterback they decide to throw out there at this point in time. And of course, like we mentioned, if Nussmeier transfers in somewhere or Jackson Dart transfers in somewhere, we're boom, there we have our next quarterback, because it looks like neither is going to be a starter. It looks like it's going to be Mr. Oklahoma State's Spencer Sanders. He's the next guy up. And it's only because, he's an old guy. He kind of has a propensity to put the ball in the harm's way a little bit. It is going to be a new system. I mean, Ole Miss is bringing in a lot of new faces, so they got to get chemistry going this spring. So I think it's going to be a slower start, but by the end of the year, I think he could leapfrog some people. But I think Spencer Sanders, just where we have him in the top 25 in the transfer portal, and his track record of just being a fairly capable college quarterback, and him being paired with Lane Kiffin, I think he would be next in line. But I don't have a whole lot of faith in Walker Howard nor Jackson Dart to wrestle that job away from him. But I have been wrong before.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the biggest quarterback competition all across the SEC down there in Oxford, in Lane Kiffin's track record. Like you said, it's hard to project who they're going to be starting anywhere.
It seems like every year we have this debate, don't we? It was either John Luis Plumlee or Matt Corral, and then okay, is it going to be Luke Altmaier? Is it going to be Jackson Dart? And now here we are, third straight year quarterback battle, or 3 out of 4 years quarterback battle. So nothing new down there. But what's the old saying? Conflict brings about the best results, or something like that. I don't know.
Iron sharpens iron, all that garbage.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron. That BS and that all that coach speak. So, I'm sure Juice Kiffin's all about that type of stuff.
So we haven't even got to Joe Milton yet. Is he next on your list?
Yes, Joe Milton is next on my list. Just because of areas that we talked about. Arm strength is there. Area of opportunity is there with the scheme and his weapons. It's just down to down accuracy. Can you refine yourself a little bit? Can you show that you can do things when things break down, not throw the ball in the harm's way, and still give your guy an opportunity to catch the ball? Because, when he was coming out of Michigan, his first year, early 2021, one of the things that really did stand out is like when his base was just altered, he was just a complete mess. And so if he's not just standing from the pocket and he's forced to be flushed right or left, which can happen when you execute one man routes, Mike, that one man isn't open, where you're going to go with the ball. You got to have to make something happen. Of course, Hendon Hooker was pretty good at that. I still need to see a little bit of that ability from Joe Milton moving forward, but high end is there. High end, I mean, I think for impact, I wouldn't be inclined to have him as a 94 type of rating, depending on how spring ball goes. If he shows to be a little bit more refined, I know it's a glorified practice, but still, it's the only glimpses we have from playing against a depleted Clemson secondary, and before you're playing Poop State in week 1.
That's
I mean, it's kind of like
this year it's Virginia. I don't know if you're considering them Poop State, but hell, the way they played last year, maybe.
Yeah, like, dude, they had 2 dynamo receivers. One of the more accomplished passers in Brennan Armstrong. They soured his reputation. I thought he was going to be like a left-handed Kyle Trask. Very similar style of play. Very prolific. Not afraid to throw the ball downfield. You got Wicks and Deontay Thornton, former Mississippi State or SECer, who is 6'5" and a massive catch radius, and you bring in a stale offense that didn't work when you had premier talent at Clemson, or you needed a Trevor Lawrence or a dynamic receiver like T. Higgins to make the most of a matchup-oriented style of play. Of course it wasn't going to work. So I just don't really have that much respect for Virginia as a program right now, even though, Poop State may have been a little bit too far, but still, like, I just think that's going to be an easy win for Tennessee, based on where things are right now.
Now, again, the list I have outdated, perhaps, but the one I'm looking off here has got Jalen Milroe next on the list. What is he number 9 on your list, and why not Ty Simpson? What's your thoughts there?
It's just because, he had a little bit more reps than Ty Simpson's last year. Of course, bringing in Tommy Rees, it seems like, Ty Simpson's probably going to be the guy. They have a pass together. If they're going to go to a more classic Nick Saban offense, more under center, they still are multiple. They still use 12 personnel a whole lot. But you know what? I was not shy sharing the fact Alabama could not run the ball on first down each of the last 2 years with Bill O'Brien in charge. And one of the primary factors, they sucked at counter, Mike. Classic gap scheme, trapper, wrapper, 2-side pullers, success rate in the 20s each of the last 2 years on first down. I mean, the best third down offenses are offenses that avoid third downs the best. And that simply was not Alabama the last 2 years. If it wasn't for Bryce Young's magician skills, I don't know where they would be. Certainly a lot more frustrated as a program based on their trajectory, not playing for a national championship, or not winning a national championship either the last 2 years. Crazy standard, I know, but that's the standard they built for themselves. So I still think that Jalen Milroe, just because of his experience, might have the inside job, but of course it is going to be a total crapshoot. All bets are off once the spring ball starts, and we can see, who's going to start getting more reps with the ones, what the offense is actually going to look like, if there's going to be any type of carryover at all, or if it's going to try and resemble a little bit more what Notre Dame was doing last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's what I hear about Tommy Rees as well. I mean, they want to get back to the running game. They want to get away from hero ball, where yes, I mean, they've had some of the best quarterbacks in recent SEC history, but you can't always rely on that. And hell, I mean, Bryce Young may be the number 1 pick, and again, you lost multiple games with him. So is that kind of what you're hearing behind the scenes as well? I mean, they want to get back to, and not only that, but it'll help the defense out, which certainly seems to be working well in Athens.
I mean, that's what I surmised from the situation for sure. I'm not thinking they're going to all of a sudden try and rip off Heupel's offense with Tommy Rees in charge and go a completely other way, even though that would be really fun. If if Saban's like, oh, so you want this to be football now? All right, we're going to be running the super spread now with our athletes. But no, I definitely think it's going to be kind of a more slower pace. Not that Alabama ran at a breakneck speed by any means under Bill O'Brien, but I definitely think that there's going to be a more emphasis on being better at those gap schemes, establishing the run, having more balance, and not having to lean on empty pass formations. Even though, don't get me wrong, I love the shock two-lane concept. I love what they were doing with trails. They were fantastic at it, don't get me wrong. But same time, I think Alabama is Alabama when it can impose its will, kind of like Georgia was this past season. Georgia did fun things in the pass game, but they were still able to run counter, toss, duo, inside zones at will. I mean, in fact, Georgia's offense was like the only instance I had the last three since I've been charting SEC offenses to have all 7 of their most repped pass concepts and 5 of their most repped 6 run concepts finish with at least a success rate of 50%. So think about that. The things that they were running the most worked over half of the time. That's a great recipe for success, and I can't tell you how difficult that is. Alabama 2020 didn't do it. Joe Burrow and them boys didn't do it. So gosh darn, Todd Monken having that type of ability to stretch defenses with the run pass, again with the versatility, that is just something that has been lacking from Tuscaloosa's offense the last couple of years. It's been a lot more zone oriented because they haven't been able to pull people, but pulling people has a lot. Okay. So gap schemes, they kind of invite more cushion. Obviously, you're not trying to reach and seal. So on average, you will have a lower rush yard before contact average, but they have a higher degree of like perfect block rate. So when that block rate does hit, they have a better rate for going more yards. So you got to lean into avenues that open up explosive gains, because while the pass game has kind of been middling in that respect, you have to maintain your identity as a physical, we can get 10 yards when you're gassed in the second quarter and really put this game away type of approach.
Now, so who do you have number 10 rounding out your list?
Rounding out my list, I guess it would be Graham Mertz. I'm not the biggest fan of Graham Mertz. I like his anticipation skills. Don't get me wrong. It's just for someone who's built as a strong arm quarterback, I would have liked to have seen at least one pass attempt beyond 35 yards downfield in a 5-game sample. For instance, someone like Devin Leary had 20. So, yeah, not a whole lot of verticality from him. He kind of leaves the ball inside a little bit too much on outbreakers, but it's the type of thing where Florida really knows who they were last year, and they were a completely different offense when they were using play action. You can go look on SECStatCat.com, Anthony Richardson splits. He was basically one of the most effective and efficient, potent passers using play action. You strip that away and you look at his passing, his dropbacks without that stuff, he was damn near one of the worst in the conference. His uncatchable pass rate was worse than Robbie Ashford, which is, not the company you like to keep when you're trying to be a first-round pick or when you're put in the discussion of being the next Josh Allen. So I think play action is going to be his best friend. I think he's going to be at least a serviceable passer, and at least he's a little bit more preferable with his experience, with his skill set, than kind of the guys who are rounding out the rest of the conference. Connor Wegman, he's also in the discussion. Bringing in Bobby Petrino certainly raised my eyebrows. I'm not going to comment on whether it was a good or a bad hire. I'm just going to say it was definitely interesting, and I like interesting. So with his tutelage, it definitely does see what can they do, especially bringing back Anaya Smith, who I mentioned earlier, who I have as wide receiver one just because of his all-encompassing game, operating from the backfield, from the slot as a return man, and what he can kind of be as a gadget player. But he was a little bit, I know he's 18 years old, 19 years old, but he just looked like a guy who needed yak stuff. He targeted the middle of the field. He was picking on linebackers to bring in a comparison for style of play, not for what style of pass they are. But think of Jimmy Garoppolo. A lot of the criticism with him was that he only throws to the middle of the field. He's afraid to throw outside the numbers. And when you look at his pass chart, it really does, the shortcoming really is accentuated. His accuracy just falls off a cliff the longer he has to throw the ball. And if you can't get the ball to your one-on-one matchups outside of the numbers and you can keep that defense kind of guessing where the ball's going to go, I just don't like where things are going to go for him. But still, he's young. He's developing. I'm not saying he's a lost cause by any means. It's just at this point in time, I have him on the outside looking in. It doesn't mean that he can't live up to his potential. It doesn't mean that his weapons can really make him look better or he can be one of the few Texas A&M passers to be one of the more explosive ones in the conference because, only Kentucky and Vanderbilt have less explosive passes than Texas A&M the last 3 years within the SEC. You got to fix that style, and it's not going to be through a rinky-dink type of passer. So, like a lot of the other guys, we got to see if he can throw the ball downfield, not throw the ball in the harm's way, and really round out where his pass plays go.
I'm going to go back to Graham Mertz real quick. Were you surprised that Billy Napier went in that direction? Do you think they should have went somewhere else, or does he kind of fit that play action style that Napier loves to do?
Well, I mean, I think he's a fit. I mean, I don't think he was like option one by any means. Like, I don't think anyone had him as option one in the transfer portal. But with how things kind of progressed in a very short amount of time, I don't think it was, all right, we'll get him and now problem solved. I think it's like, okay, we get him and maybe we can see what else comes up later down the line. And if we have him here, look, we at least give him a head start over the other guy. So we at least have some type of a battle because look, Jack Miller, what he showed in the bowl game, long-term option, no, he's not going to be fighting for that job. So it would behoove them to probably bring in somebody else. But look, as things stand, he should be at least an average bar none passer that can keep you in ball games, manage that offense, let those two talented running backs you have in Montrell Johnson and Etienne, the young Etienne, really let them shine. And then, because that's kind of how he was at Wisconsin, right? He was the secondary aspect. And for better or worse, yeah, he was not good when behind the chains or when the run game didn't facilitate things for him. But you have to think with how with how Florida is revamping that offensive line and how they have really talented ball carriers that he's going to be his best self off play action.